In a small town in the United States, far from the hustle and bustle of the big cities, lived Amelia and Tom, a couple who were known by everyone as the example of a happy marriage. Amelia, a woman in her early 30s, radiated kindness and simplicity, qualities that had made her a beloved figure in the community. Tom, her husband, was a hardworking, honest and dedicated man who did everything he could to ensure a quiet and comfortable life for both of them. Together, they were the perfect representation of happiness in a small town. Amelia and Tom had been married for almost 10 years. They had been through many difficult times, but they had always come through thanks to the love and respect they had for each other. Their life in the town was simple but satisfying. They enjoyed outdoor activities, participated in community events, and knew all the neighbors. For Tom, Amelia was the center of his world, and he did everything in his power to make her feel happy and cared for. Amelia, for her part, appreciated the life they had together and deeply valued the love her husband gave her. In that quiet town, one of the most respected and admired characters was Sheriff Hank Miller. With a long career in the sheriff's office, Hank had earned the trust of all the inhabitants for his dedication and professionalism. He was always willing to help others, and his commitment to the safety of the community was indisputable. He was a man of strong character, but kind and fair, qualities that made him a protective figure in the town. Everyone knew they could count on him in times of need, and his presence gave peace of mind to those who lived there. One day, Amelia was the victim of an attempted robbery while walking alone down a street in the town. It was not a common occurrence in that safe place, so the incident was a real shock for her. The robber, a man who had arrived by chance, tried to snatch her purse and pushed her violently, leaving her scared and in a state of shock. Just then, Sheriff Hank appeared on the scene. With impressive speed and determination, he intervened to stop the thief and protect Amelia. He managed to immobilize the criminal and arrest him in a matter of minutes, preventing the situation from escalating. For Amelia, that moment was a turning point. The image of the sheriff protecting her, his firm and determined gaze as he rescued her, was etched in her mind. Until then, she had seen him as a respectable and admirable figure, but that encounter awakened in her a feeling she had not experienced before. As the sheriff helped her to her feet and offered her some reassuring words, Amelia felt something inside her, an inexplicable attraction that went beyond simple gratitude. Sheriff Hank, although accustomed to helping people, noticed Amelia's vulnerability at that moment. He offered to accompany her home to make sure she arrived safely, and she accepted. During the trip, Amelia could not help but glance at him out of the corner of her eye, observing his gestures and his confident posture. It was the first time she had seen him up close, and she was fascinated by his presence and his reassuring voice. The sheriff, noticing her nervousness, tried to calm her down, speaking to her in a kind way and making her feel protected. When she got home, Amelia thanked Hank for his help. He smiled at her and told her that she had nothing to worry about, that he would always be there to protect her and everyone in town. Those words made Amelia feel a special warmth, an emotion that disconcerted her. When the sheriff left, she stood at the door of her house, watching him walk away, and she couldn't help but wonder why such a strong feeling had arisen within her. It was something she had never felt before, and although she tried not to think about it too much, that image of the sheriff would accompany her in the days to come. From that moment on, Amelia began to think about the sheriff frequently. At first, she told herself it was just a kind of admiration for the man who had saved her from a dangerous situation, but over time, that admiration transformed into something deeper. She remembered his voice, the way he had looked at her, and the safety she had felt being by his side. Even though she loved Tom and was happy in her marriage, she couldn't help but keep her thoughts returning to Sheriff Hank. For his part, Tom didn't notice any change in Amelia. She continued with her daily routine, and her behavior towards him was the same as always. However, Amelia was beginning to experience a feeling of internal conflict. She knew that those thoughts towards the sheriff were not correct, but at the same time, she couldn't suppress the emotion she felt every time she saw him around town. She tried to convince herself that it was all a simple misunderstanding, a passing confusion that would soon disappear. But the reality was that every time she saw Sheriff Hank, her heart beat faster, and her thoughts filled with ideas that she couldn't share with anyone. One day, while walking through the center of town, Amelia came across the sheriff again. He greeted her kindly and asked her how she felt after the robbery incident. Amelia, a little nervous, replied that she was fine and thanked him again for his help. During the conversation, the sheriff looked at her in a way that she interpreted as something more than a simple gesture of courtesy. That brief but intense encounter was enough for Amelia to feel that the attraction was mutual. From that moment on, they began to cross paths more frequently. Although their encounters always seemed casual, there was a tension in the air that they both perceived. Amelia tried to convince herself that nothing was happening, that it was just her imagination, but every time she met the sheriff, she felt that there was something special between them. Hank, for his part, was aware of the attraction he felt towards Amelia, but he tried to remain professional and respectful, knowing that she was a married woman. However, that attraction became increasingly difficult to ignore. Fate seemed determined to bring them together, and on one of those occasions, when Amelia was returning home alone after shopping, she met the sheriff on a deserted street. They both looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, as if words were unnecessary. Without knowing how, Amelia felt that her life was about to change. The attraction she felt for the sheriff was too strong, and although a part of her wanted to resist, another part wanted to give in to that forbidden passion. That meeting was the first of many. Amelia and Sheriff Hank began to see each other in secret, looking for secluded places where they could be alone without anyone seeing them. They knew that their relationship was dangerous, that they were crossing a line that they should never have crossed, but the desire they felt for each other was something that neither of them could control. In those meetings, they both forgot about the outside world and the consequences, letting themselves be carried away by a passion that consumed them completely. Amelia was torn between guilt and desire. She knew that she was betraying Tom, the man with whom she had shared her life and with whom she had built a relationship based on trust and respect. But the attraction she felt for Hank was something she could not ignore. With each meeting, her love for Tom seemed to fade a little, and the excitement of being with the sheriff became her new reality. For Hank, the situation was also complicated. As the town sheriff, he had the responsibility of maintaining order and being an example for others, but the love he felt for Amelia overwhelmed him. He knew that this was wrong, that their relationship put his reputation and career at risk, but he could not give her up. In their encounters, they both gave themselves to each other with an intensity that only danger and secrecy could provide. The small town, oblivious to what was happening in secret, continued with its daily routine. No one suspected the affair between Amelia and the sheriff, and for everyone, she continued to be the exemplary wife, and he, the respected sheriff. But they both knew that this secret could not remain hidden forever, and that, at some point, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. After that first passionate encounter, Amelia and Sheriff Hank were dragged into a relationship that they both knew could not end well. The thrill of the forbidden, the desire they felt for each other, and the intensity of their encounters meant that neither of them could stop. They met in secret, sometimes in remote places in town, other times in the sheriff's office, during off-peak hours. Each date was filled with passion and danger, and though guilt consumed them, the desire to be together was stronger. Days turned into weeks, and Amelia and Hank's encounters became more and more frequent. It was as if their clandestine relationship became a vortex that absorbed them without leaving them any option to escape. Every time Amelia was with Hank, she felt like the outside world disappeared. The life she led with Tom seemed to fade away in her mind, and the sheriff became her center. That secret relationship gave her a thrill she hadn't felt in years, and although she knew she was playing with fire, she couldn't help the urge to see him. Hank, for his part, found himself torn between his duty as sheriff and the love he felt for Amelia. Every time he had her near, he forgot the risks and the consequences. But as soon as they separated, reality hit him. He knew he was risking everything, that his reputation and career were in danger. However, when he saw her, all of that seemed insignificant. Amelia had awakened in him a feeling that he could not ignore, and although he tried several times to end the relationship, she always ended up returning to his arms. Meanwhile, Tom still did not suspect anything specific. However, he could not help but notice some changes in Amelia's behavior. His wife, who had always been loving and attentive, now seemed more distant. He often found her lost in her thoughts, and her displays of affection towards him had diminished. At first, he thought it was a phase, perhaps some kind of crisis in their marriage that they could both overcome. But as the days passed, Amelia's attitude became more and more disconcerting. Amelia tried to lead a double life, hiding her feelings and her encounters with Hank while pretending to be the faithful and devoted wife. He knew that the change in her behavior was evident, but he could not control his reaction every time he thought about the sheriff. Tom, although worried, tried to trust his wife. He had no reason to suspect her, but his intuition told him that something was not right. His attempts to get closer to Amelia and to regain the connection they had before seemed futile. She was always distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. Over time, rumors began to circulate in the town. Although no one had concrete proof, some townspeople commented on the close relationship Amelia seemed to have with the sheriff. There were those who said they had been seen together more than once, and although they were isolated comments, the situation was beginning to raise suspicions. Tom heard some of these rumors, but he tried to ignore them. He didn't want to believe that Amelia was capable of betraying him, and preferred to think that they were just gossip. Despite both of their attempts to keep their relationship a secret, the situation became increasingly difficult to hide. The encounters between Amelia and Hank became more risky, and both knew that the margin of error was getting narrower. But the attraction was too strong, and every time they tried to get away, they ended up going back to each other. That forbidden relationship had become an obsession, and the need to see each other was stronger than any fear. Tom began to notice that Amelia was spending more and more time away from home, often with the excuse that she had business to attend to or that she needed time for herself. At first, Tom accepted these explanations without questioning them too much, but the frequency with which Amelia disappeared and the coldness she showed when she returned made his concern turn into suspicion. He began to notice the details, the gestures and the attitudes of his wife, looking for any clue that could clarify the situation. One night, while Amelia was sleeping, Tom checked her phone in search of something that would explain her behavior. He found nothing concrete, but the lack of answers only increased his suspicions. He felt that something was escaping his control, and the thought that Amelia could be involved with someone else began to consume him. Uncertainty kept him awake at night, and whenever he tried to confront his wife, she either avoided the conversation or responded evasively. Deep inside, Amelia felt the guilt growing ever more. She knew she was betraying Tom, a man who had been good and loyal to her for all those years. But the connection she felt with Hank was something she couldn't ignore. Every time she was with the sheriff, she forgot everything else, and the thought of giving him up seemed unbearable. However, the weight of the betrayal was beginning to affect her. She knew that if Tom found out the truth, the pain it would cause him would be enormous, but the attraction to Hank was too strong. As the weeks passed, the tension between Amelia and Tom became more evident. He tried to remain calm, trying to find a way to confront her without the situation getting out of hand. But his patience was reaching its limit, and the need for answers became more and more urgent. The rumors in the town continued, and people began to notice the change in the dynamics of their marriage. What was once a relationship based on trust and love now seemed to be shrouded in doubt and suspicion. Finally, one day, Tom decided to follow Amelia. The uncertainty and pain of not knowing what was going on had pushed him to the edge, and he was determined to find out the truth. He waited patiently for her to leave the house, watching her movements from a distance. He watched her walk towards the center of town and then head towards the sheriff's office. Tom's heart was pounding as he followed her, and although part of him hoped it was all a mistake, another part of him knew he was about to discover what he had so feared. From a safe distance, Tom watched as Amelia entered the sheriff's office. He waited a few minutes, his mind filled with dark thoughts and his heart torn with anguish. Finally, he decided to approach and enter the office, hoping for answers. What he saw when he walked through the door changed his life forever. There, in a corner of the office, he found Amelia and Sheriff Hank, in a moment of intimacy that left no room for doubt. The scene that unfolded before his eyes was devastating. His wife, the woman with whom he had shared an entire life, was in the arms of another man, and that man was the town sheriff, someone he had respected and admired. The anger and betrayal he felt at that moment were so deep that he could barely contain himself. All the pain, rage, and humiliation mixed inside him, creating a storm of emotions that consumed him. Amelia and Hank, shocked to see Tom, tried to explain themselves, but their words only increased Tom's fury. The image of his wife betraying him in that way was something he could not bear, and in a fit of rage, he lost control. Adrenaline and anger took over him, and in an impulsive act, he unleashed all his fury on Amelia, without measuring the consequences of his actions. As the impulse wore off and the reality of what he had done hit him, Tom stood still, staring at Amelia's body, still in disbelief at what had happened. The woman he had loved and protected was now lifeless, and he was responsible. The silence that followed was overwhelming, and Tom realized that everything he had built, his entire life, had been destroyed in a single instant of fury and despair. Hank, who had witnessed everything, managed to snap out of his shock and quickly took control of the situation. Despite his feelings for Amelia, he knew he had a duty to fulfill, and although the pain consumed him, he realized that he could not ignore what had happened. With a mixture of sadness and professionalism, he proceeded to investigate the crime and arrest Tom, knowing that this moment would forever mark his life and that of everyone involved. After that fateful night, the small town became a hive of rumors and sadness. News of Amelia's murder spread quickly, leaving the townspeople in a state of shock. No one could believe that Tom, a man who had always been a dedicated and respected husband, could have committed such a terrible act. The tragedy that had destroyed the town's exemplary couple was the talk of the town, and the entire community was plunged into an atmosphere of mourning and mistrust. Sheriff Hank, who had witnessed the tragedy, found himself caught in an emotional and professional crossroads. The woman he had secretly loved was dead, and although he knew that his relationship with Amelia had been the spark that triggered that misfortune, he could not allow the crime to go unpunished. His responsibility as sheriff was clear. He had to bring Tom to justice and make sure he paid for what he had done, despite the pain and guilt he himself felt. The investigation into the murder was brief. The evidence was clear, and Tom's confession left no room for doubt. During the interrogations, Tom appeared dejected, almost absent, as if everything that had happened was not yet real to him. He barely spoke and accepted his guilt without resistance. He knew that the act he had committed was unforgivable and that he had destroyed his own life in a single moment of rage. The image of Amelia, the woman he had loved, still haunted him, and the weight of his action crushed him, leaving him without the will to fight. Hank, despite his pain, remained professional throughout the process. He knew that he had to do his duty, even if his heart was broken. As the investigation progressed, guilt invaded him more and more. He realized that he had played a fundamental role in that tragedy. His relationship with Amelia, although passionate and full of desire, had been a failure towards his own responsibility and his ethics. He had allowed his feelings to cloud his judgment, and now, the consequences of his actions were irreparable. The news of Tom's arrest and the revelation of his relationship with Amelia shook the town. No one could understand how a secret, clandestine relationship could have led to such a tragic outcome. The townspeople began to view the sheriff differently, some with contempt, others with distrust. What had once been respect and admiration was now transformed into resentment and suspicion. Although Hank had done his duty, people could not help but see him as part of the cause of the tragedy that had shattered the lives of two of their most beloved neighbors. Tom's trial was quick. The evidence and the confession left no room for a solid defense, and the verdict was clear: guilty. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, and upon hearing the sentence, Tom seemed to accept his fate with a resignation that surprised everyone. He knew that what he had done was unforgivable and that there was no justification for his act of violence. With each passing day, regret and sadness consumed him, and the image of Amelia haunted him like a ghost he could not escape. Hank, although he faced no charges, knew that his reputation and career were ruined. The townspeople looked upon him with distrust and resentment, and he himself felt that he had failed in his role as sheriff. He knew that he could never regain the respect and trust of the community, and in the end, he decided to resign from his position and leave town. With a mixture of pain and shame, he left the place he had once considered home, carrying with him the weight of guilt and remorse that would never leave him alone. The town, for its part, tried to carry on with life after the tragedy, but the memory of what had happened remained in everyone's memory. The story of Amelia, Tom, and the sheriff became a dark secret that no one wanted to remember, but that they never managed to forget. The tragedy that had shaken their community left an indelible mark, a reminder of how betrayal and excessive desire could destroy lives and break the peace of a place that, until then, had been quiet and safe. Over time, Amelia's name was forgotten by some, but for others, especially those who had known her, her memory persisted as a sad reminder of the tragedy that had changed the town forever.